Welcome to the Standard of Truth podcast. In this podcast, Dr. Gerrit Dirkmaat and Dr. Richard Leduc explore the early history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the life and teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith. They examine the original historical sources and provide context for events of the past. They approach the history of the Church with faith, expertise, and humor.
Hi, welcome to another episode of the Standard of Truth podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Gerrit Dirkmaat, and I'm joined by my friend, Dr. Richard Leduc.
Hello, Gerrit. Thanks for having me back. We have an exciting episode today. We're going to be talking about the Catholic Church and some of their beliefs as we talk about our Catholic brothers and sisters answering some Littner questions today.
Yeah, I feel like we had to kind of pivot away from Hulk smash Gerrit. I feel embarrassed every time we put out an episode and I'm like, hey, stop attacking the apostles. I mean, not embarrassed. I mean, obviously I want to stand up for what is true. And at the same time, I have a very difficult time moderating, apparently, which is why you had to institute your score.
We had to implement the Dander meter. Originally, it was on a scale of 1 to 10. We didn't feel that was precise enough, so then we put it on a scale of 1 to 1,000,000, with the first score there coming in at about 901,000. Your Dander was way up, way up.
Yeah, we've got some real Dander issues, not to be confused with dandruff issues, which can also be a problem.
Yeah, we also have those, but it's a separate issue.
It's a separate issue, and we just need to get some Selsum Blue. And,
I was going to say, so don't say Selsum Blue, because this podcast is sponsored by Head and Shoulders. Head and Shoulders.
Yeah.
Are you flaking from your scalp? Head and Shoulders. So Gerrit, we can jump right into the Phoebe Draper Palmer Brown mailbag. This first email comes to us from Valerie. She says, "Hello, doctors. I'll raise your budgetless bishop's candy cost and raise you the cost of being a seminary teacher. The $50 that we are given for the year can only be used on supplies for our class, and it specifically calls out that we cannot use it for food. But as any good seminary teacher knows, food is how you get them to come to seminary, and candy is how you get them talking." Which is very true. We have youth conference that's going to be coming up next week, and I think 97% of the budget is food. It is the best way to go.
To keep them happy with food, or just to blow it all on food for yourself.
Both, but mostly to keep them happy with food. If they're hungry, then there's no chance of them feeling the Spirit and getting anything out of But if they're full and they're happy, then you have a shot. After 6 years of teaching seminary, I feel like I've consecrated much of my time and family finances that could have been used to visit Palmyra, but we have been able to afford the premium subscription. I've been called, very nice. I've now been called to service in Young Women's, and having a budget is glorious. After years of begging and pleading, one of my kids is willing to begin listening to the podcast. It took being set apart as a missionary, having breaks from home MTC, and wanting to listen to something while driving around in the car, but now he's willing. He's been called to serve in the Pennsylvania, Raleigh, North Carolina mission. If you please give him access. Thank you for all you do. Having a missionary has made me appreciate you even more. And sunrise, sunset, Valerie, as my son has returned from his mission, my son Rigdon, home from Peru, it's nice to have him. We love having our entire family all together, as none of my children are now on missions, and so none of them are listening to the podcast. But it's nice, Valerie, that your son is doing that. So,
well, I noticed Valerie took the compassionate parent approach. She didn't lock them in the back of a squad car and force them to listen. That's she allowed her son to come to her and say, you know what? there's the home MTC is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. Please let me listen to something else. Oh, I've got something for you.
Well, so, our good friend and my bishop, Brady, his son, Ben, just started home MTC this week. And I tried telling him, I try to tell every missionary, look, the home MTC isn't the MTC. And the MTC isn't the mission. Because they're not used to sitting in class for 12 hours. It's an absolute draining process.
Well, and imagine getting to the MTC only to have someone else become the district leader and get the key.
That's just, imagine that. And also no one is speaking English and you're like, what? Where am I? What's happening?
We had our a good friend of the show email or text us after hearing our discussion about the MTC district leader, and he said Gerrit had a confession, and that was that he was at least briefly the holder of the key as the MTC district leader, but then got a tooth knocked out playing basketball at the MTC, which sounds just about right for those of you who played basketball at the MTC. And so he had to give the key to someone else because he had to go to, emergency like dental surgery and whatnot. And, it should call to your mind, Gerrit, the same thing that, Roman conquerors had a slave behind them whispering as they rode through the streets, all glory is fleeting. And you had that key. You had that key for a brief moment, but that glory was fleeting. And now you came crashing back to earth.
It's like the scene from 6 Days in August with Sidney Rigdon. We actually received several texts. Our friend Brian also sent us a text of a key. He was also the MTC district leader. It's very exciting that all of our friends were so
I feel
powerful.
like at this point, a lot of our friends are just flexing about how righteous they were because they were the MTC district leader.
Also, there's no way to check. So, it's entirely, you know what, Gerrit, I'm going to text you and tell you, although you know full well, I don't have the leadership ability to be an MTC district leader. I never had it. I never will.
No, I wasn't even considered. They took one look at me and said, that is someone who's going to lead both the mail and people astray. And we can't give him this. We can't give him this trust. I mean, thank you so much, Valerie, for this email. And, the reason why we have premium content is because we had people that were trying to donate to the podcast to keep us on the air because it costs a considerable amount to put this out. And we don't have a big time backer. And so we said, well, we don't want them to just donate and give them nothing. So we said, well, let's create, some American history podcasts. This year we're doing Doctrine and Covenants. We will go back to American history at some point, not soon enough for the coach, but at some point we will. But with missionaries, we just give them the whole library for free because Richard has set up essentially dozens of Google Drives. and if we have the missionaries' missionary email, he can give them access to that and they can listen that way if their mission president permits it through a Google Drive. So that's what, when people are saying, can you give my son access? That's what we're talking about, is that anyone who's a missionary, they just get it all for free. And so that's how they get access.
They just send us their missionary email and we grant them access. We have 37, because you're only allowed 600 accounts or email sharing per Google Drive. And so I think we had to upgrade to 40 trillion terabytes to be able to, for all of the folders. And the folders are all named inside jokes only, really, that make me laugh. I noticed that, Gerrit, I set an alarm the other day and the music that I set was an inside joke really for myself. And that's when my wife said, boy, you've got a real problem. That's when she finally realized. It
only took this many years,
24 years. So this next email comes to us from David. David, who I know, and his daughter is, I mean, one of the greatest violin players since, Jenny Oakes Baker. She's incredible.
Wow. Okay.
She's incredible. Dear Venerable Dr. D and the other guy. Well, okay. All right. Thanks, David. I can't believe Gerrit was in our building and I missed it. You can't accuse Brady of being dumb. He knows how to take advantage of a gift that falls into his lap. Had I been there, I certainly would have awkwardly approached Gerrit and stammered something like, "You're my biggest fan. I mean, right now I'm I'm picturing Buddy from Incredibles, but I digress." Richard teased yesterday that he announced that our first email comes from David. I realized if I want my email to be read on air, I need to come up with a better question. So I posed my first question a month ago. I went back and started listening to the Joseph Smith and the Restoration series from the beginning. And after suffering through 22 episodes of Martin Luther, John Calvin, and Jacobus Arminius, it was nice to finally get to Joseph Smith and his legs. It is 22 episodes in. I believe that's not an exaggeration.
Is he not kidding about the 22 episodes?
I legitimately believe that it was at near the end of the season 2 before we actually got to Joseph Smith.
Does context not matter? Does context not matter?
We spent an entire episode talking about the strong arm Lucy Mack's brother-in-law had, or father-in-law, as he's chucking.
As he's winging Age of Reason at people. Like, why don't you read this and not believe in God? Yeah, it's true. We did spend a little bit of time on that.
Yeah,
but doesn't that help you better understand Lucy Mack's faith?
I thought I understood the first vision, but not until I understood that Lucy Mack got hit in the face with a book from an in-law that I really understood the first vision.
Then you knew. Then you knew. Here's Thomas Paine telling you shouldn't believe in anything.
I feel bad for all the listeners who had to wait through that in real time, especially all the missionaries who got released before ever hearing the name Joseph Smith. What's funny is
you better read that again because I don't think anyone could understand that.
It's a very funny sentence. I feel bad for all the listeners who had to wait through that in real time, especially all the missionaries who got released before ever hearing the name Joseph Smith. If they joined the Google Drive right at the beginning, they will have gone a full 2 years and never heard the name Joseph Smith. That is very funny.
Now, only for that podcast. Obviously, for all of the other podcasts, on the drive,
yes,
we mention it constantly.
We occasionally we get to them. Yeah, I do feel like I have a better grasp of the origin of Christian religions now. Well, there you go, and maybe some answers to my original question. My son has been seeking answers about the nature of God and the eternities. DNC 76 is the obvious place to look, though he decided to listen to some guy on the internet who's leaning him toward Trinitarian. Insert eye roll emoji here. Gerrit did a great job as a guest on that other podcast. What other podcast is that, Gerrit? I'm not aware of any other church podcasts.
Obviously, the Follow Him podcast.
Oh, my gosh.
We talk about Doctrine and Covenants Section 76, which is a much better podcast than ours.
Oh, infinitely better. By Hank Smith and John, by the way? Much better. Much better. That's not sarcastic. It's actually much, much better.
No.
By the way, near the end, the host asked an interesting question. Why are we, as Latter-day Saints, afraid to teach there is no hell and that everyone will be saved? I would love to hear Gerrit elaborate on that question. It also begs the question, are Mormons Universalists? You recently read a quote, by the way, Gerrit, from Brigham Young where he kind of teased that exact thing. And one more, somewhat related question, do Mormons believe in purgatory? What is the difference between the doctrines of purgatory and spirit prison? I know Gerrit currently has his dander up from Jill's question about Brigham Young, so these questions should be a layup for him after that. Keep up the good work. Regards, David.
Well, so obviously, when Brigham said it, in the quote that I shared, he said, I don't want you to think that I've become a universalist because there was a Universalist church in his time, and that Universalist church taught that everyone was going to be saved, right? And so Brigham's like, well, look, I'm not a member of the Universalist church, but there is a truth in the doctrine that everyone outside of sons of perdition are going to be eventually saved in a kingdom of God. Now, as it relates to purgatory, this is the Catholic doctrine of that people who are already destined for heaven. So a good way of thinking about purgatory is, let's say I go in and I confess all my sins. So first of all, I'm a good Catholic, right? I've been baptized. I've received confirmation. I've done all of the 7 sacraments. I'm a good Catholic person. Okay. But of course, even a good Catholic person is going to sin, right? So I go in to my priest and I confess to him, and he gives me absolution and gives me, what my penance is supposed to be. And so I leave my confession feeling, I'm on top of the world. You can hear the song in the background. I'm on top of the world, and as I'm walking out of the parish, I see Bill, Bill the adulterer. I see
William
him.
McClellan.
Yeah, I see him walking across the street on his way in to confess. And instead of thinking to myself, oh, Bill, I'm so glad he's finally decided to go confess his sins, as I'm walking across the street and giving him the stink eye, I'm thinking to myself, Bill, I hate that guy. What a sinner. If there's anyone who doesn't deserve to be forgiven, it's Bill. And right as I have that thought, I get hit by a bus and I'm killed. Now I'm not getting hit by a bus because I said that. Although, if you believe in determinism that, God's controlling everything, then maybe he's like, oh, gonna have a thought, here comes a bus. We have a problem, right? Because the Lord says that no unclean thing can enter into the kingdom of heaven. Well, but I'm unclean, right? Because I just committed a sin in the way I thought about Bill, and it's pretty mean. And, but I died. So I would otherwise be going to heaven. So in Catholic theology, they have 2 different kinds of sins. They have sins that are called venial sins, and they have sins that are, deadly sins. And these venial sins are sins that are not regarding, they aren't considered as depriving the soul of divine grace. Okay. So these are these sins that, I had a horrible thought about this person. Whereas like a mortal sin is one that would leave me in hell if I didn't repent for it. Right. So a venial sin is there, but a mortal sin is something like, like adultery or something like that. Well, so even a venial sin still a sin though. So how can I enter into the kingdom of heaven clean? And that's why after you die, Catholics believe in an immediate judgment. So in that sense, they're kind of similar to Protestants, but that immediate judgment is going to send you either to purgatory or to hell. And if you go to purgatory, it's there that you're going to have these venial or these more minor sins purged out of you. And it might take a long time. I mean, some people are in purgatory for 1,000 years. You go there and you have these venial sins purged out of you so that you can be prepared for the final judgment and to go into heaven clean. So in that sense, in the sense that it is a place where spirits go before going to their kingdom in heaven, the doctrine is similar in that regard. The difference is Catholics only believe people that are eventually going to heaven go to purgatory. So if you're someone who is not eventually going to heaven, you don't go to purgatory. You go to hell. And again, most people would be going there. Catholics will use scriptures to try to justify the doctrine of purgatory. In fact, one of the scriptures they use to justify most is in the Apocrypha, which is part of the Catholic Bible. It was part of the Protestant Bible up until the 1800s. And that's one of the reasons why it gets cut out. The books of the Apocrypha are taken out of the King James Bible. They're taken out of the King James Bible because some of the scriptures in the Apocrypha were used to justify work for the dead and purgatory. But they'll use other things to demonstrate it. They'll say, when Jesus is talking in Matthew chapter 12, he talks about, how a sinner will not be forgiven either in this age or in the world to come. Well, why would you even have to say that someone could be forgiven in the world to come? If you can't be forgiven in the world to come, then why are you referencing that? Just say, he won't ever be forgiven, and stop. Right? Why would we even suggest that there's forgiveness in the world to come if, in fact, there is no forgiveness in the world to come? You see what are you picking up what I'm putting down?
I am picking up what you're putting down. That makes a lot of sense.
And so the argument that Catholics will make, and they will, much to the anger and chagrin of Protestants, they will even quote Paul. Now, if there's anyone who thinks that Paul is saying, a Protestant will lose their mind because they love Paul. And Catholics will actually use 1 Corinthians 3:15 as a means of talking about someone being purged from their sins. So in this letter from Paul, let me read a little bit more so it's a little bit in context. Verse 9 begins, "For we are laborers together with God. Ye are God's husbandry. Ye are God's building." So again, he's obviously talking to believers here. He's not talking in his letter to the Corinthians. He's not like, hey, you Roman pagans, why don't you try to believe in stuff? No, he's writing to people who already have accepted Jesus, people that he's taught when he was in Corinth. "According to the grace of God, which is given unto me, as a wise master builder, I have laid the foundation, and another buildeth thereon. But let every man take heed how he buildeth thereupon. For other foundation can no man lay than that is laid, which is Jesus Christ. Now, if any man build upon this foundation gold and silver and precious stones, wood, hay, and stubble, every man's work shall be made manifest. For the day shall declare it, because it shall be revealed by fire, and the fire shall try every man's work, what sort it is. And if any man's work abide which he hath built thereupon, he shall receive reward. And if any man's work shall be burned, he shall suffer loss, but he himself shall be saved, yet so as by fire." Now, the very fact that it's referencing works is already going to cause, every Baptist listening to scramble to try to hit the mute button before I mention the word works again, even though I'm literally just reading 1 Corinthians chapter 3. But Catholics will take that as, okay, so if someone isn't fully right with God, if any man's work shall be burned, he shall suffer loss. So this is a believer. This is someone who's a member of the church, but they built upon their foundation of Jesus some works that were not right. So if any man's work shall be burned, he shall suffer loss, but he himself shall be saved, yet so as by fire. So wait a minute. He's going to suffer, but he's still going to be saved? And they take this as justification for the idea of purgatory, that you're going to suffer for your evil works, but if you've done all the other things you're supposed to do, all of the other sacraments, well, then you will be saved, yet so as by fire. And so this idea of purging these sins. And, you know, it's a doctrine that drives the Protestant Reformation, because one of the things that Catholics believe, again, because of scriptures in the Apocrypha mostly, they believe that you can lessen someone else's time in purgatory. So, you know, Bill, my evil thoughts about Bill should be 1,000 years in purgatory, having my evil thoughts about other people purged away so that when I enter the kingdom of heaven, I'm actually like Jesus, instead of just, in the presence of Jesus, but also someone who hates other people who are trying to repent, And so the idea behind it is that I can pray in Catholicism. I can pray. I can hold a mass. I can give alms. I can do things to try to lessen the time of some of my deceased relatives in purgatory.
It's one of my favorite. It's one of my absolute favorite Catholic doctrines. By the way, it's a beautiful. It's coming from a very beautiful place, and when I talk with Catholics, I often lead with that as one of my favorite doctrines that Catholics believe. It's as close as I've found. That's kind of this work for the dead piece that allows to. Just the idea that things can be done here to affect things there is it's a beautiful. It's coming from a beautiful place, I believe.
Yeah. Now Martin Luther didn't think so.
You don't say.
The reason why he didn't think so is he saw, people purchasing indulgences, which is, giving donations to the church in order to lessen someone's time in purgatory, as an affront to the grace of Christ, by saying that someone's essentially saved by works. And so Protestants just universally reject the idea of purgatory. It's one of the key elements of Protestant theology that there is no such thing as purgatory. There is no ability to lessen someone's time, that immediately when you die, you immediately go to heaven or you go to hell. So one thing that's really key to understand, David, with your question, is that the only people who go to purgatory in Catholic theology are people who are eventually going to go to heaven. Now, you can have all kinds of arguments with Catholic theologians of the liberal sort or of the conservative sort about who that is, whether or not someone who was never baptized could still be a candidate for purgatory. But in the end, only someone who is already going to end up in heaven goes to purgatory. So that means, at least for most Catholic theologians throughout history, although, like I said, there's some very liberal Catholic theologians today who will say things like, we know that hell exists, but we don't have to know that anyone goes there, right? Kind of pushing this kind of universalist doctrine. But at least for all of Catholic history, the people who go to purgatory, people who are eventually going to go to heaven. So you can't actually get someone out of hell because you do works for them, or you pray for them, or you light a candle for them, or go on a pilgrimage for them. You can only lessen their time in purgatory before they eventually go to heaven. And so that's the key difference between that and the spirit world. So for us, for Catholics, again, traditional, and you can find all kinds of people that are arguing something different, but traditional Catholic theology, still most people are not going to go to heaven because you have to believe in Jesus. Most people don't believe in Jesus. They certainly aren't going to, be baptized a Catholic or confirmed a Catholic and confess like they're supposed to as a Catholic and all those other things. And so most people aren't going to go to heaven. So most people don't go to purgatory. Most people go to hell. For Latter-day Saints, everybody goes to the spirit world. And while in the spirit world, you will suffer for the sins that you did not repent for, there's going to be an emptying of the spirit world. And eventually everyone outside of the sons of perdition is going to be resurrected and ultimately go to a kingdom of heaven. And so there is a distinct difference. Now, of course, what we believe in the celestial kingdom is far beyond what a Catholic believes heaven is like anyway. For a Catholic, heaven is much more like what we might consider the terrestrial kingdom to be. Although that's a bad analogy because they don't line up. And so there is a key distinct difference. A Catholic believes that purgatory is a place where good people go to prepare to go to heaven that they were always going to go to. Latter-day Saints believe the spirit world is where everyone goes, and everyone in that spirit world has an opportunity to go to the celestial kingdom, depending on how they reacted to the light and knowledge they did have in this life. And so it's a pretty key difference in the scope. The scope of Latter-day Saint, spirit prison or spirit world is everyone is going to heaven eventually. And not just everyone's going to heaven eventually, everyone has an opportunity to go to the celestial kingdom, depending on how they live their life.
That is very good. No, that's a very good explanation of the differences. It's well done.
Shall we move on to the next email then?
Well, staying in Catholicism, this next email comes to us from Jen, and the subject is Catholic exchange student. And she says, "Dear Dr. Dirkmaat," and then parenthetically doctor with a question mark, Leduc. That's hurtful, Jen. So here I am, another listener that was led to your podcast from the Follow Him podcast. I tried listening to a season 5 episode first and quickly learned that with over half of the podcast episodes being banter, I had no hope of understanding anything without going back to season 1 for context. That's on purpose, Jen. That's to get the listening numbers way up. Nothing makes sense. We're talking about things that you believe at your core, but nothing we're saying makes sense because you didn't listen to season 2, episode 7. Now to my question. We are hosting an exchange student from España, as my son would say, this coming school year. She is culturally Catholic, but not devout. We've hosted a student before, and that student loved coming to church with us, but he also came from a culture and family that was fairly non-religious. I'm not sure if our Spanish student will want to attend church or not, but how do I prepare her for her first church meeting if she does want to come? I know a little bit about Catholicism, but I want to help her make some sense of our religion in the simplest way possible, hopefully by being able to explain our religion using terminology a Catholic would understand. Any advice would be appreciated. Well, Gerrit, you perfectly set the table with the previous question that David asked. And it just leads, it's almost like there was a planning meeting and we just lead seamlessly into Jen's question about the España exchange student.
I imagine that nobody listening will come away going, you know what? I'll bet they planned this because they listen to the rest of it and they're like, clearly whatever planning meeting they have doesn't actually take place. So this is, a good question. So we Richard kind of hit on this on our last one, is that if you're looking for similarities in doctrine, it is much easier to help a Catholic understand what we believe fundamentally because they believe some of the same fundamental things. So, I think you're going to have to, explain the apostasy, and that, might be a little bit tough if she's really trying to learn. If you're trying to explain where our church comes from, you explain that, well, we believe that after the apostles died, that apostolic authority was no more on the earth, that there were good people, there were good Christians who tried to follow what what Christ taught, but they no longer had the authority of the apostles, and that God called Joseph Smith and gave him the apostolic authority. To be honest, I mean, depending on how devout she is or how often she goes, I mean, and when you say someone is culturally Catholic but not devout, you're describing 99% of all Catholics in Europe, where you know, we're going to church sometimes, and by that I mean not really. I mean, France is a supposedly a Catholic nation, and I think it's somewhere around like 8% of the country goes to church on a monthly basis. So, I mean, that's not super high if you're looking at your percentages. So, the most stark thing that's going to just smack her in the face, if she's never been to a Protestant church, and this kind of goes along with our later discussion that we're going to have after this, you know, how about that for a tease? We're eventually going to have another conversation that might even be better than this, but you won't find out about it if you don't keep listening. The thing that's going to be the most stark to her when she goes inside one of our church buildings is that there's a gym in there, and that's part of our worship area. So Catholicism and Catholic churches are highly ornate. Even churches that are in poor areas have statuaries, have, if they can afford it, stained glass. They have paintings, and a crucifix will be there in the chapel with, an image of Jesus on the cross. And so, it's an important thing to help her understand if she hasn't ever been to a Protestant church, not that we're Protestants. And that is that Protestants, the whole Protestant Reformation, eliminated these kinds of imageries and statues and crosses from their worship services. So someone who's gone to church at a Catholic church and then comes to one of our churches, the first thought that's going to come to their mind is, hey, there's no crucifix in here. There's no ornate altar. There's no images of the apostles or Jesus. That, it's just pews and a place to speak. And that will be stark to her, especially if she's culturally Catholic. And, that's part of one of the things that you can explain is that early, church leaders, like many American reformers, wanted to keep the churches very Spartan on the inside so that you could focus on the doctrine of Christ and not have your ideas or your sensibilities drawn to, say, an image rather than that. As far as, helping her understand our doctrine, I mean, helping her understand, that there's a restoration, but that there are some things that are very similar. Catholics believe that salvation is a mixture of grace and works. And again, you'll find all kinds of the Latter-day Saints be like, no, it's only grace for us. It's only... Yes, obviously, but also we're also saying that that grace is applied to you through some essential works, some essential ordinances like baptism. So you can help her understand that. You can help her understand our ecclesiology in the sense that our bishop is not a professionally trained preacher. He's just an average guy, and you can tell me, our bishop's actually, he's an insurance salesman. But for 5 years, he's been called to lead our church. And our talks that we give are not given by our bishop. We don't have any paid clergy. Just individual members of our congregation are asked to speak on topics. And that will help her understand your worship service. Obviously, she will feel something similar to when she sees the passing of the sacrament. And, it's important to help them understand that even though we don't call it that, the short name of it, we call it the sacrament. But of course, for Catholics, they have 7 sacraments. but this is the sacrament of the Lord's Supper is what it's really called. And, that anyone can take it. So, she might wonder, can I take the sacrament if I'm not a Latter-day Saint? Anyone can take it. It's to remember Jesus. I doubt if she's a high school student that she's going to have a long, drawn-out conversation with you about transubstantiation. My guess is no, but I think that will seem somewhat similar to her. The idea that we pray, we sing hymns, and we bless the bread. I mean, pointing out to her that the priests up on the altar, up at the table, are blessing the bread, because to her, only a Catholic priest can bless the mass, the host for the mass, which is the wafer that it's going to be given. And you say, yeah, our priests, even though they look like young men, they are blessing the bread and then the water to be distributed. So I think there's a lot of similarities you can build on. But the most important is going to be trying to help her understand that Latter-day Saints believe that Christians are good people, that they've done wonderful things throughout the world, including Catholics. We aren't like other Protestants who are constantly talking about how much they hate Catholics. But that the authority from God, which was given to the apostles by Jesus, was taken from the earth when all the apostles were killed, and that was restored by Joseph Smith.
I think that's great. I think you can also reference in 1976, there was a couple of theologians that released something, Donald Clark Osmond and Olive Marie Osmond, and a little bit country and a little bit rock and roll, I think also sums up what Gerrit was saying in terms of where we are in comparison to the Catholic Church.
Yeah, we're a little bit country and we're a little bit rock and roll. Well, speaking of which, that brings us to our last email that I kind of teased, but also it's kind of the main point of what I want to discuss.
Well, Gerrit, now we do have an intro into this.
Okay.
Thanks to the subjectivity of fair use laws, we have a little bit of intro to cue us up here.
There are 3 wooden crosses on the right side of the highway. Why there's not 4 of them, heaven only knows. I guess it's not what you take when you leave this world behind you. It's what you leave behind you when you go.
Wow, amazing. Okay, well, so this comes from Lindsay. In the subject line, she wrote something clever and witty. So instead of actually writing something clever and witty, she thought, I'll put that there and that will be clever and witty, and then they'll read my email. And it seemed to have worked. Hello, doctors. I've never written into a podcast or anything, so this feels foreign to me. Well, you ought to try hosting one. Anyway, I've been enjoying your podcast as I clean my house. I've been finding random places to clean, like under the treadmill, so I can keep listening and ignoring my other responsibilities. That's what we expect from you, Lindsay. Thank you. We need you to have the most spotless house because you're just cleaning. I've been binge listening and cleaning to catch up on all your stuff. I had an interaction the other day with my massage therapist. She's not a member, but did marry into a member family, so she knows a bit. But from what I understand, her husband isn't active, and they occasionally go to church with her in-laws. And it always happens to be on Fast Sunday, which creates a lot of questions, I'm sure. Boy. Yeah, you got to get those in-laws to invite them to church on a Sunday that's not Fast Sunday. Just so she knows that where Brother Miller took his RV last weekend is not the only part of what we believe. I mean, it's a massive part of it.
It's
don't
the
get me
main
wrong.
part. It's not all that we believe, but it is the main part of what we believe.
Yeah, I mean, it's where I took my RV on an RV trip, what it was like going to the choir or band concert, and then also Jesus and the Atonement. But that, I mean, it's down the list of where it is. She asked me why we don't have crosses And I told her the standard answer I was given as a child. We don't celebrate Christ's death, but his resurrection. I'm not satisfied with my answer and was wondering if you had a better one. I know we believe so much in the atonement of and sacrifice of Christ, but not wearing or displaying crosses just isn't how we show that. I know you don't get to all the emails, but I'm giving you a month before I see her next to reply. Well, so, we are responding quite quickly to this.
Yeah, we're killing it.
You could schedule a massage, on Friday. I mean, we're getting it right there. Thank you for helping to strengthen my testimony and understanding of the gospel. P.S. If I tell you I'm a seminary teacher in rural Montana, would that help? And that is what took you over the finish line.
100%.
Yeah. The fact that you like the podcast, no, it didn't do nothing for us. But the fact that you're a seminary teacher in rural Montana, you are crossing the Sweetwater River every day that you do that. And so because of that, we'll answer. But this is a question that I wanted to spend some time on. And it's a little akin to our other questions that we have. But the reason why I wanted to spend some time on it is this is a perfect example of not just us as Latter-day Saints not knowing our religious history, because it shouldn't be surprising that a Baptist, doesn't know Latter-day Saint history. I mean, they're still giving you the you guys think Jesus and Satan are brothers, right? That kind of thing, right? But it is stunning how little Protestants know about their own history. Because the reason why Latter-day Saints don't have a tradition of either putting crosses on their churches or wearing crosses, it is something that has to do with when the church was founded. And I think Latter-day Saints don't fully appreciate just how unique we are because the rest of the Christian world moved. So first and foremost, this is the important thing to understand. After the Reformation took place, there was a huge movement because Catholics, prayed to Mary, because they had all kinds of icons and they venerated relics, right? So here's a piece of the true cross, and if you go to it and you pray at the foot of the true cross, it'll lessen your time in purgatory, or it will help your kids, because of this Catholic mysticism that was attached to items and icons. In the early days of the Reformation, there were entire groups of new Protestants who went on iconoclasmic, riots, essentially, for lack of a better term. They would go through the existing churches, and they were all Catholic at that point because it was Catholic churches, and they would destroy images of priests, and they would destroy crosses and crucifixes. The difference between a cross and a crucifix is a crucifix has Jesus on it. It's an image of Jesus on the cross, whereas a cross is just, a cross. And now Martin Luther himself was opposed to that kind of iconoclasm. And so Lutherans, they still maintained having a cross in their churches, but still people weren't wearing cross. The idea of wearing a cross necklace, that is like super late Protestantism. That people aren't wearing crosses as jewelry in any time of regular way until the 20th century.
I think this would be an enormous shock to people. This would be an enormous shock because now that's, if you are buying a MyPillow or you're seeing a MyPillow commercial, the guy's wearing 37 crosses in the commercial. Like it's the most I mean, that's how you show you're Christian. It's the exact opposite. It's incredible.
Yeah. And so for Martin Luther, he is troubled by the veneration of what he's going to see as idols, right? So the idea that you go to a place where you believe, the bones of St. James are laid and that somehow gives you greater access to God. Luther's not happy with that idea. But he also appreciates the power that symbols have in teaching the message, right? Because again, almost everyone you're teaching is illiterate. They're not just scripturally illiterate. They don't have the ability to read because there's no education system. So images become pretty important. It's part of the reason why there are such imagery in Catholic churches in Europe, because I may not be able to read about the story of Adam and Eve because I don't have the ability to read, but I have the ability to look at images. And so when I look at stained glass and it shows a snake tempting a woman, and then in the next pane, her eating an apple, well, I've just learned about the fall of Adam and Eve, even though I can't actually read about the fall of Adam and Eve. But this is going to come as a great shock to you. John Calvin and the Calvinists, they took the Reformation much farther. Now we've had a conversation on this podcast a little bit, but primarily on our sister podcast on discussions about both Joseph Smith and the Restoration and Search These Commandments, about Anabaptists, who are these radical Protestants. Well, one of the first things they do is they say, absolutely, you can't have any graven images in your churches. And guess what the cross is? It's a graven image. Do you find people going up to crosses and praying as if their prayers have more authority because they're next to a cross? This is what an early radical Protestant would say. And if you do, then that is an idol, because they're thinking that something or some work gets them closer to Jesus. So John Calvin and the reformers that will spawn after him, people like John Knox and John Wesley, they will see the cross as a symbol of Catholic idolatry. Protestants in the early days constantly accused Catholics of being idol worshipers because they're praying to an image of the Virgin Mary, because they're praying to the saints, right? Because they believe you can pray to the saints and the saints will help them. I'm going to pray to St. Anthony and St. Anthony's going to help me find my lost car keys because he's the patron saint of missing things. So they see all of these images as violating the second great commandment. Well, and so almost all churches in America in Joseph Smith's time, nearly all of them are Calvinist or English based. Well, because the Church of England, or the Episcopalian Church, and the Methodist Church, which breaks off of the Church of England, because both of them see the cross as a symbol of Catholicism and idol worship, they don't have any crosses in their churches. Now, I know right now you're saying, no, I've seen an Episcopalian church and they've got crosses all over the place. Yeah, they do now. They just didn't when Joseph Smith was receiving his revelations. So there would never have been a question for Joseph when he's founding the church about whether or not you erect a giant cross outside of the meeting house, because no Protestant erects a giant cross outside of the meeting house in the 1830s and 1840s. Outside of Lutherans, and there's almost no Lutherans in America in Joseph Smith's time. right? So yes, there's several thousand Lutherans, but there's such a small number. There's a reason why Joseph doesn't list them off as part of the people that he went to go, check out their churches before he had the first vision. Lutheran, there are thousands and thousands of Lutherans in America now, but that's because of the later German and then even later Scandinavian immigration to the country. So most of the Lutheran influence you get into the country today actually comes from the Scandinavian immigration to the country, which is in the 1880s and the 1890s. And they're bringing all their Lutheranism with them. And of course, they're bringing the symbol of the cross with them as well. But there are very few Lutherans in America in 1830. And so one of the crazy parts about this is that the person who's likely to say that you're not really a Christian because you don't have a cross on your church could very easily be a Baptist. Where if you read any Baptist theologian from 1800, he would say the cross is a Catholic papist symbol of idolatry that violates the second commandment. And any true Christian wouldn't have a cross on their church and wouldn't be wearing a cross. What's really interesting when you read some of these early arguments is some of the early arguments surrounding it sound kind of similar to the things that you shared. Let me just share some of them as a demonstration of this feeling. So in 1855, the Anglican Church or the Episcopalian Church, one of the leaders of it, publishes a book about the laws and usages of ornaments in a church. So in an Episcopalian church, there's an entire section. So this is 1855. This is 25 years after the church is founded. We've been, you'll even have people say, well, why didn't they put a cross on the temples? And sure, we eventually have an angel Moroni, but what do we have on the Kirtland Temple? We have a weather vane. Well, guess what Methodists teach in the 1850s is the right kind of thing to put on the top of a church. That a spire is better for religious character than a cross. And that a ball and a weather vane is the usual and appropriate finish to the top of a Protestant spire. So Protestants in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s and 60s, they saw the cross as a Catholic idol. And they didn't put them on their churches, and they didn't wear them around their necks. So when our church became a church, the culture was, if you put a cross on your church, you are saying that you are Catholic or that you worship idols. Well, what happens then? I guess maybe I should read, let me read a little bit of John Wesley, the founder of Methodism. Founder of Methodism, John Wesley, he's not someone that someone would casually say, is a pro-Catholic. He's quite angry at the idea of Catholic ideas. And this is part of one of his books in response to the Catholic Catechism. The Church of Rome, without any authority from Scripture, makes a distinction. In worship, they grant sovereign worship to any besides God is idolatry, but that were not the host of the very body and blood of Christ, it would be no less than idolatry to give that honor to the host. So he's talking about the blessing of the sacrament. we understand then how to call that worship that they give to the cross. We call it idolatry. For whatever the host is, the cross is just a representation and not the person to be worshiped. The second commandment teaches us, thou shalt not make any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in the heaven above. Thou shalt not bow down to them nor serve them, which are the two words to be considered. One, pesel, which we rightly translate graven image, and it properly signifies anything carved and cut out of wood or stone. And so it is 40 times rendered in the Greek translation, graven thing, so that an idol and an image are forbidden. The next word, themuna, which doth properly signify a similitude or likeness, and is also translated, and thus it was understood by the fathers. Justin Martyr, when he recites this law, so one of the early Christian fathers, said, God forbade every image and every similitude. Christians abhorred the veneration of all images. Indeed, the command is so express against this practice that there has been a kind of self-condemnation in the Church of Rome, and they commonly either altogether leave out this commandment or they render it imperfect by halves, simply saying, thou shalt not make unto thee an idol. So he's pretty clear that he sees a cross in the church as being a graven image and an idol. Another example of this, a Christian theologian, a Baptist who will later become a Millerite Baptist, he will write an entire treatise on this called The History of the Cross. His name's Henry Ward Dana. Now, Henry Ward Dana, if, for all of my Seventh-day Adventist listeners, Henry Dana Ward. I switched his name up in the middle there. Sorry, everyone. Henry Dana Ward. They will know that Henry Dana Ward is one of the founders of the Seventh-day Adventist movement. So originally he's a Baptist, then becomes a follower of William Miller, who's a Baptist, and he writes a book in the 1870s, and it's called The History of the Cross, Its Pagan Origin and Idolatrous Adoption and Worship of the Image. How do you really feel about this, Henry? So he is going to preface his book by saying, in the churches of America, a flood tide of ritualism now threatens to overwhelm the gospel, such as in the 4th century deluged the primitive churches with relics, martyrs, monkish legends, lying wonders, pagan customs, and the invention of the cross. Excited by the mysterious movement, the rising generation are fired to see, to fall in, and form a part of the brave show, dressed in colors or white robes with banners and standard bearers for admiration of the beholders. The sign and image of the cross is now, as of old, in the forefront of the pagan assault upon the simplicity of the faith of God in Christ. And so, look, what he's going to go on to argue is that the early reformers saw the cross as part of this mysticism, as part of this separation that was made by the Catholic Church from people to directly worshiping God. And that he's upset because in the 1870s, he sees the cross and other things flooding into these otherwise Protestant churches. So what starts to happen is you have a huge Catholic immigration into America with the Irish potato famine in the late 1840s. Now, that's primarily localized to the Northeast. But then in the 1850s and 1860s, you get a huge German Catholic migration that comes in. And Protestants start to feel that they all have to answer the same question that Lindsay has to answer from her massage therapist. And that is, a Catholic, a Catholic German gets off the boat and the Presbyterian there is trying to convince him to come to their church. And the German says, well, I don't even know if you're a Christian. Why don't you have a cross on your church? And so there's been good studies on this that demonstrate that throughout the 1850s, 1860s, and 1870s, Protestant churches slowly start introducing crosses onto their churches as a means of trying to kind of draw in these Catholic immigrants. And, it's so funny because some early Protestants were opposed to any type of instrument being in the church. It was grounds of excommunication for you to play the fiddle, for instance.
Huh.
And now, what do you see in a non-denominational Protestant church? A live band. The fear of people like Henry Dana Ward, I'm going to say his name wrong again, but Henry Dana Ward, is that the razzle-dazzle of the pomp and circumstance that other churches had, that the Catholic Church had, is being used to try to bring people into our Protestant churches. But the entire point of a Protestant church is that there is literally nothing between you and Christ. That your worship should be only you and Jesus, and not you thinking about Jesus hanging on a cross in this imagery, because then you're thinking about the imagery and you're not thinking about Jesus. And so the reason why this is such a frustrating one, I mean, this doesn't get Gerrit's Dander up frustrating, but the reason why it's so frustrating is every Christian outside of a Catholic and a Lutheran, whoever asks you as a Latter-day Saint why you don't have a cross on your temples, or why you don't have a cross on your church, or why you don't wear cross jewelry, every single one of them, barring the Catholics and Lutherans, they come from a faith tradition that used to see someone having a cross on their church as saying that they were papists and that they were Catholics. What happened is, as the culture changed because of immigration into the United States, Protestants changed their position. And frankly, I think you can see Protestant churches are continuing to change their position. In the 1800s, you could readily be excommunicated from a Protestant church, Episcopalianism, Presbyterianism, Baptist church, for committing adultery. In today's Protestant churches, there's not even a conversation about it. And again, obviously there's some exceptions, but I'm talking about generalities. The aspect of Protestantism that in some ways sows the seeds of its own destruction is that once you've thoroughly convinced everyone that there is literally nothing but you and your own personal relationship with Jesus, there are no ordinances, and the church is essentially meaningless. I mean, you never went to church because it saved you, because you're only saved by faith. There's no ordinance there that saves you. You go to church because you want to learn more about the Bible because you love Jesus. But it turns out because you love Jesus is not a better motivator than going, backpacking on the weekends. And so they sowed the seeds of their own destruction by saying that the church was not essential. It's just what you should do. And you see that with the collapse of Protestant denominations everywhere. I mean, and even conservative Protestant denominations. The fact that 500,000 Southern Baptists left the Southern Baptist Convention last year alone is crazy. 500,000 members departed. what used to be a growing church in America is now a shrinking church in America. And to stem the tide of people leaving, what do you find? You find many Protestant churches doubling down on the we've got to find a way to razzle dazzle to get people in here. We've got to have the best bands and the best parties, and we've got to have a pastor that doesn't ever condemn anything as sin except not loving everyone exactly the same. And in their rush to try to do that, what do they find? Their churches are not stemming the loss of membership. The loss of membership is increasing. So what denominations don't use the cross? Well, the denominations that came out of this time period of the Second Great Awakening, but didn't shift their doctrine over time. So Seventh-day Adventists don't put a giant cross on their church because they saw the cross as an idol. Jehovah's Witnesses, which also, eventually come out of the Millerite movement, don't use the cross. Now, for a casual Christian, they'll say, that proves you're not a Christian. But there was a time in the 1830s and 1840s when every single Protestant you ever met in America agreed with you that it was wrong to use the cross as a symbol of your Christianity. Maybe I should lastly leave with what's on, LDS.org under the topics and questions page about the cross, because people ask questions. So look, the church has an official position on it. But I think it's important to understand that historically, we never started with a cross. And in fact, no one around us had a cross. But the rest of the Protestant world moved to conform to wider society. And now it's become such a thing that they forgot that they've forgotten. And they look at us and they say, you're obviously not a real Christian because you have a cross, even though their great-great-grandfather would have been horrified to see a cross on his church. This is from churchofjesuschrist.org. The crucifixion of Jesus Christ is part of his atoning sacrifice. It is a foundational doctrine in Heavenly Father's plan of salvation. Through his suffering in Gethsemane, crucifixion on the cross, and subsequent resurrection, Christ overcame sin and death, allowing all the opportunity to come unto him and receive salvation and exaltation. The symbol of the cross is used in many Christian churches as a sincere expression of faith in Jesus Christ. Members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints remember with reverence the Savior's suffering both in Gethsemane and at Calvary. We believe that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he rose again on the third day according to the Scriptures. The Bible, Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, and Pearl of Great Price all emphasize the saving significance of Christ's death on the cross. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does not display the cross on its buildings or in its chapels or in its classrooms or similar places. However, its teachings are focused on the doctrine of Christ's miraculous atonement that happened in Gethsemane and on the cross. Like many other Christian faiths, the Church emphasizes the living, resurrected Christ. This is why the official symbol for the Church is an image of the resurrected living Christ, who guides his church today through revelation to his prophet. The symbol also serves as a reminder that we can each have hope in a glorious resurrection because of the suffering, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. As is also true of other Christians, the way we live our lives is the primary way we demonstrate our love for the Savior and his work. And you know what's fascinating? When you read Christian theologians, I know we're out of time, so I can't read them, but when you read Christian theologians from the 19th century talking about it, they will literally make this exact argument. They will say, why are we celebrating the image of his death instead of his resurrection? Why do I think that if I have a gold-encrusted cross on my church or around my neck, that shows me more of a Christian than how I treat my neighbor? And so It's one of the most fascinating aspects of the history of our church and the history of Protestantism in America is that in the 1830s, if you had a cross on your church, you were not a real Christian. And in 2025, if you don't have a cross on your church, well, you must not be a real Christian. And the same Christian, the same faith tradition, are the same people saying that you aren't a real Christian because you don't have a cross. The difference is we never changed, and they did. That's the great difference. Is that everything you ever want to know about the cross, Richard?
It is actually really fascinating.
Look, obviously, a Christian who wears that cross and the woman who asked you the question, she doesn't know the history of the Christian cross as a symbol.
No, of course. Of course.
And for all I know, she might be Catholic. So maybe she's always thought of it as a symbol. But they see it as a mark of their devotion. And so we should absolutely respect that and see that as someone saying, this is them saying they're dedicated to Christ. At the same time, I don't think that we have to feel like we aren't real Christians because we haven't changed what we believe as our symbolism regarding to the cross over the past 150 years, and they have. These other radical Protestant groups like the Seventh-day Adventists and the Jehovah's Witness, they don't have crosses because they never had crosses, because they saw it as an idol symbol. Now, that doesn't mean that when we see it outside of a Methodist church, I mean, think of that. We read John Wesley saying the cross is an idol symbol, and the symbol for the United Methodist Church today is literally a cross and flame.
Yeah, it's a burning, yeah.
Yeah,
it's
that
in
flame,
yeah.
That cross and flame adopted in 1968, not going all the way back to John Wesley, who saw crosses as wrong. Same thing with the Episcopalian or Anglican Church. In the 1840s and 50s, you do not have a cross anywhere around you. And today, it's a symbol of that, we're a real Christian. And so basically culture changed the definition of what constitutes being a real Christian. And many of these Christian churches changed their beliefs on this topic in order to fit more into what the world considered to be a Christian. And it is one of the more fascinating things that a faith devoted to destroying all imagery that could be in place of Jesus now holds it up as a proof of whether or not you're a Christian by whether or not you've adopted the imagery that their great-grandfathers said was idolatry. So thank you so much for joining us. And I don't know that you want to give the entire history of the cross to your massage therapist, but you know what? You've got an hour. I mean, I don't know how much time you're paying for, but hopefully everyone appreciated that. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Standard of Truth podcast, hosted by historian Dr. Gerrit Dirkmaat and Dr. Richard Leduc. If you know of anybody that could benefit from the material in this episode, please share it with them. Until next time.